welcome to the Downing Cuts. Today we have Kevin Inouye, a SAG-AFTRA freelance actor, stuntman, author, and instructor. He runs Fight Designer LLC, offering prop weapon rentals, gun wrangling, and fight coordination services. Did say that right?
Yeah.
For theater and screen productions. Welcome to the Downing Cut, Kevin.
Thank you.
I appreciate you being here. You're one of the teachers I had that made a huge impact on me when I first started acting, and it was all about stunts. And I met you. I don't know if I met you on the film or before that, but it was a film called Man Crush.
Yeah. I can't remember. I think I bumped into you somewhere before that, but yeah, I think that was the first time we actually worked together. Yeah.
That never got done, right?
Yeah, I don't think so. I never saw a cut. All I saw was the trailer online. So
Keep Kwando my ass. Bitches can't fight for shit. Randy, this tough and talented talent search is being televised throughout the entire country. What are you expecting tonight?
Well, this is an opportunity for all my fans. I'm looking for an average Joe. Balls of steel.
This guy's been my hero ever since I started shaving, man. I mean, growing up, I didn't want to be sexy. I wanted to be Noah Nicaragua sexy.
Will, you can't fight for shit.
23, 44. I know how to fight for myself, thank you.
What does he think he is? The Rock? Fucking Vin Diesel? Fucking Christian Bale? Fucking dog bounty hunter?
Let me tell you something. Let me tell you the truth.
You know it's not too late to go back on this.
Mommy.
He is meals for the grave maggots.
but that that's kind of endemic of that like indie, hobbyist level is there's a lot of passion, but people run out of
Yeah.
money or follow through energy or whatever. It happens.
Oh man. But so I think that was the first time that I've had training for involving stunts and how to fall without hurting yourself. And it stuck with me throughout the years. So thank you. I
That's
want to
awesome
say I
to hear. Thank
appreciate
you.
that.
Yeah.
I think that your skill set is rare, and I think a lot of people try to fake it or wing it or whatever. But I think there's things that you taught me, fundamentals that you taught me that has carried on throughout other things that I've done in the acting. But this is not about me. This is about you. And I want to ask, like, how did you get started? What path did you go down first? And then where did that develop? Like, was it acting or was it stunts? Was it film,
Yeah.
theater?
As with most things in my life, it was a weird roundabout kind of thing. I mean, I dabbled in musicals and theater and stuff in high school, and then a little bit more into martial arts and dance and stuff like that as well when I got into college. And the idea that you
Which martial art?
combine them was awesome. The one I did the most of was Bujinkan Ninpo Taijutsu. Actually, the school that I was in switched over to Jinenkan. There was like a political rift in the ninjutsu world in the late 90s. And so, there was various different branches. And I've gone to a couple other schools since then, but the time when I was really like doing it multiple times a week on a regular basis was mostly in college. So that was pretty foundational to me in terms of things like falling and rolling and martial intent. And I did theater in college too, but I was never that great, and I knew that. In high school, they always needed men. So it's like you were either good and you had a really good role, or you were not and you had like 6 small roles. And I always had the 6 small roles. Like I could have quick costume changes. And I think a large part of that was that I was self-conscious and awkward and was never quite sure, but what do I actually do? Like I can do script analysis. Sure, I was a liberal arts student. I can do all this heady stuff all day, but I get up there in front of the camera or on stage and it's like, yeah, but what am I actually like doing? And so for me, stage combat was where that all kind of worked because I didn't have to ask, what am I doing when a punch is coming at my face? Like, there's no like, what's my motivation or what's my playable action? It's like, oh, here's the choreography. Just put it in that. and now you just got to act that. And that made sense to me, in a way that sometimes just, the talking head kitchen sink drama stuff didn't right away. So maybe it just, eliminated the need to be a better actor for a while. So that journey then, like stage combat was where I first felt like I really had something to contribute. So I got really hard into that after college. I started getting certification with the Society of American Fight Directors. They had a variety of different certifications you can get. It's currently 8 different weapons categories that you can certify in, as well as sort of a 8.5, which is firearms, but that's just usually a 2-day intensive with a certificate of completion and a safety workshop, which is different from the others where you have an adjudicated performance for a fight master, and you have to do a full scene and act it, and so it's actual competency rather than just safety for the other 8 weapons. And the Society of American Fight Directors was founded originally by David Boucher and others to serve both stage and screen, and it's in their mission statement. But it has, over the years, become much, much better at serving the theater world than the film world. And I think, especially academic theater, where people love certificates and degrees and pieces of paper and classes, that caught on a lot better there than it did in the film world, where a lot of film stunts are still about, well, which stunt family did you grow up in and train with? It was a little bit more incestuous in the early stunt world with these sort of legacy families, the Eppers, and then you kind of had to have an in. And there've always been notable exceptions, and there's still some of that where I think a lot of the SAFD is maybe better at teaching stage stuff, and that's what the test is for. And then inevitably people end up teaching a little towards the test because you want your students to pass the test. So, I when I moved to Seattle in 2000, I had my first 3 certifications. I was actor combatant with the SAFD, and I wanted to keep going. I wanted to get advanced actor combatant. So I jumped in on some classes that Jeff Alm had at the University of Washington. I don't remember if they were officially through Freehold or who back then, because I wanted to do as much as I could. And I've been doing workshops with the Patty Crane workshops as well, with the International Order of the Sword and the Pen. And those were kind of mind-opening because those brought together martial arts and historical European martial arts and films stuff like stunt stuff and theater and movement, and it kind of put them all together and was like, well, what can we learn from each other? So that was kind of my paradigm, because that was right after I started taking classes. My first teacher was very active in that workshop. So I started taking classes in 98 in DC, and the winter break of 98, 99 was my first Patty Crane workshop. It just blew my mind. Seeing that there were these historical treatises of Renaissance Italians doing what I associated as ninjutsu hambo techniques, but with a sword, wearing poofy pants and feathers in a cap. I'm like, oh, what? And then seeing all these different things people were doing with it. So when I moved to Seattle, I kept doing classes with Jeff, but I also kind of discovered the world of indie film. There was a lot of great energy, a lot of great stuff happening. Not a great place to make a living doing it, but a great place to get experience. And so I dove into that, and I initially thought like, oh, I've done a lot of stage combat. I'll be able to just jump right into this. It's all the same. And some things are and some things aren't. And so that was also a learning curve for me, was figuring out what translated technique-wise. But then also, as I started getting better and working with more legit productions, it was 2012 when I got my 2011, 2012, somewhere in there, when I got my SAG card doing stunt work. The culture is very different, and the expectations are very different. The professional standards are very different, and the background of most of the performers is very different. So it is a bit of a different game. So I took some time kind of learning that as well. Also, the weapons you use tend to be different. I mean, the SAFD weapons include things like, small sword and shield and quarterstaff, and things that at the time I wasn't seeing anyone actually use much in film. That said, I got my SAG card doing sword stuff, and my last SAG union stunt gig was doing small sword on turn, and my next project I'm going back to is going to be another fantasy thing. So it happens, but this was back before Vikings and all this other stuff kind of brought it back. The before Lord of the Rings even. But there was a lot more like firearms and martial arts and stuff like that. And so I also found that at the time the SAFD nobody there wanted to touch gun stuff with a 10-foot pole. They just did not want to have the responsibility for that. They didn't want to get into that. It didn't work with the same training paradigm. So the kind of nobody was doing that. And so when I started doing indie film in Seattle, that was an opening. I was like, oh, there's a need for this. So I didn't come into it as, I have military or police experience and I'm a range officer and this and that. It was, oh, here's a need and I have interest. I guess I have some homework to do. So when I was in Seattle, I as we were doing all these, detective dramas and action shoot 'em ups with police and all, I went to the Seattle Community Police Academy to learn some of their procedure stuff. I went to some of the IDPA shooting matches and tried out some of that scenario-based shooting, which is very different than just going to a public range and shooting a piece of paper slowly. Completely different game, much more fun. Yeah, so trying to find ways to fill a niche where there was actually demand, where I didn't have to worry about competing with people who were already established in their field, but nobody else was doing it. Hey, I can do that. And that actually drove a lot in my career. And that was my first book, was the Theatrical Firearms Handbook, because there was this need for the information. And again, a lot of people just kind of didn't want to go there, but that meant a lot of people were making it up and doing unsafe things. So not that a book is the ideal way to learn these things, but it's better than nothing. And it can hopefully steer some people towards the right information. And then likewise, my second book was the Screen Combat Handbook. And that was really geared at other people who, like myself, come from other training like stage combat or martial arts. And we're trying to figure out how to translate that into film work, whether that's as a choreographer or as a performer or as a director or a DP, trying to figure out, well, how do I capture that action? How do I edit that action together? Because in screen work, you do have to be aware of what's going to happen downstream. What you see on set and what you do is not what the audience will watch on screen. And so you have to plan for the edit. You have to plan for the shot size. You have to plan for the film speed. All of this, you need to know a little bit of everybody else's job. And so all of these things have come out of just seeing where there's a need, where can I be useful? That's a lot of where that's come out to. And then the acting teaching stuff, when I was in Seattle, I felt like I was doing a day job that I felt like wasn't going to go anywhere. And I was doing theater and film stuff that was fun, but wasn't really going to go anywhere. And I started having kids and I was like, I need a real job. So I went back and got my MFA in theater pedagogy because I'm familiar with academia. I'm comfortable there. And it comes with a security that constantly auditioning doesn't. So yeah, I got my MFA. I got some teacher certifications in primarily physical-based performance approaches. So Michael Chekhov technique, more recently Margolis method. Both of those are psychophysical ways of getting kind of like a physical subtext that answers that same question of, but what do I actually do? What am I doing with my body to translate all those ideas and words on the page into something that I can repeatedly do, whether I'm feeling inspired or have something to draw from in my own life or not. Coming from stage combat, a lot of what I do is things like getting stabbed and killed and stuff that I don't want to go method on. I don't want to know what that feels like.
Yeah.
Or being a bad person, because the audience wants to cheer when you get smacked down by the hero. And neither of those are things where I want to get into that from a inside out approach, or find that within yourself and really just turn into that person while you're on that production. I don't want to do that. And the audience can't tell what's going on in here. I just need to figure out what's the audience going to see and that I can do and that'll get the job done.
So you still stuck with the acting then? I thought maybe
off and on, yeah.
Slithered out, like you were still doing both
here and there. Yeah, I mean when I can. My last union job was as a day player, not doing stunts. So I can do. I've done SAG gigs both as an actor and a stunt performer. About the same amount of both at this point. It's pretty even. It's kind of funny watching my IMDb. It's like, okay, which one's winning? And then that little like gun wrangling thing at the bottom. But when I started having kids, especially acting in live theater, I love it, but it's like, okay, I'll see you all in a month and a half, because you go to work and you don't even come home, you go straight to rehearsal, and then it's late. Same thing with directing. I've done some, but you're gone all the time. But film and television, unless you're a lead, which I'm generally not, you go in for a day for fittings and you're done. You go in a day in a couple of weeks, you got your day player thing, and then you come home. If it's stunts, you go in, you die a couple times, you're done. If it's gun wrangling, if it's not an action thing, they might have a couple of days when they got something going on, and you're done. So that's worked out fairly well for me, finding balance.
Break down so this is our audience, could be people who are looking to get into acting. What's gun wrangling? What does that actually mean?
Yeah. So I've had a number of different titles along those lines. The one that people have become much more familiar with through the unfortunate accident of Rust is armor. So gun wrangler and armor are kind of interchangeable. Or I've had directors, Malik Isas, when I was working on Urban World in Seattle, they just like called me weapons. Like, yo, weps, we need 2 more guns. Okay. I don't care too much about the title. But basically, it's the person who is responsible for the safe use and the allocation of weapon props. So if you have somebody who is doing a scene where they are, let's say there's a handgun, and a basic action of they pull the handgun, they fire a couple of shots, and then they get tackled. And that's, the dramatic event in that episode of that drama show, right? You've probably got at least 2 different props, probably 3 props. You've got whatever is firing, whether that's something that has muzzle flash or not, whether it's a gas blowback airsoft or firing blanks. You've got something that can simulate in some way the firing action, but you probably don't want to get tackled with that either, or tackle someone who might still have live blanks in a gun or things like that, or just the more expensive, more fragile prop for that matter. So it's probably getting swapped out for a rubber double for that shot. Sometimes you got a hard rubber or inert one for when they got to draw, because the soft rubber sticks in the holster, and a soft rubber one for when it gets thrown or when you get tackled, because it hurts to get smacked with hard rubber. So you've got to figure out what do they need for this shot, and you want to make sure that they only have the safest thing that will get the job done for that shot. So you don't want to have a bored actor standing around all day as a guard with a real firearm, even unloaded, but especially loaded with anything. There's just no need for that. But if all of a sudden the director decides, oh, let's push in on that person for a while, you might need to make sure you've got something to swap out that doesn't have like visible mold lines on the close-up from where the rubber was cast in 2 pieces, or something like that, right? So you kind of have to know the shots. And then when someone needs something, you go in, you give it to them, you tell them what it is, make sure that they know what they've got, and if it does have any level of function, know how to operate it for what they need to do. I mean, they don't need to have to know how to field strip it if all they're doing is pulling a trigger, but they need to know, like, okay, is the safety on or not? Does the hammer have to be back? Is there anything I need to do or not do? I had one actor who was constantly hitting the magazine release with his thumb on a sidearm in one shot in a hotel. We had like 5 takes in a row. He puts his gun and like the magazine drops out the bottom. So sometimes it's even like, what do you not do? Make sure that they feel safe with that. They always have a right to ask, just, can I see how this is going to not hurt me or my scene partner? And then as soon as the shot is done, you come and you take it back. You say, thank you very much. You check in if there were any misfires or any problems, and then you hang on to it until they need it again. And so that was the big breakdown in Rust, and why everybody heard about this is because the armor wasn't there and wasn't doing their job, wasn't empowered to do their job. So yeah, gun wrangler and armor, kind of the same thing. You can have ideally you've got a crew. And so there's one person kind of in charge, and they have assistants, because if you're doing a gang shootout, it takes a long time to do the whole group. I've run into that, and it sucks.
I have 2 questions.
Yeah.
How do you manage people who are low budget,
Mhm.
let's say, right? They don't have the funds. what are the protocols if you're using just like an airsoft gun?
Yeah. No, it's a great question.
Or a low budget film.
Yeah.
Yeah, like if they're gonna shoot somebody, how do they do that?
Yeah. So I think one of the misconceptions we run into is that if you're not using blanks or real guns, you don't need an armor or an expert in the firearm. And I think some of that is, maybe from a safety perspective, somewhat true, but there's a couple of things. One of them is a large part of the danger of firearm props is always the perception of firearm props. Every year there's a couple of incidents. Someone will email me because it's what I do. News things where someone almost got shot because they were on a low budget indie and they were faking a bank heist or a drive by, and somebody saw it and didn't know it was a movie. This is the scariest one to me. You can look it up online if you want. There's a body cam footage of a police officer who sees an actor walking out of the building with like a mask and a gun or something and has been told that there's a violent crime in progress. They actually get a shot off and miss before they stop. And the person's like, no, it's fake. Yeah.
Wow.
Pure luck
Yeah.
that shot missed. But yeah, so part of it is just knowing the protocol and who to notify and how to make sure that, nobody's taking it out back for a smoke and still has, something slung over their shoulder or on their hip. Making sure that people take that kind of safety seriously. And there's also just the technical aspect of, hey, if this thing jams, do you know how to fix it? Because I do rent props. When it's especially when it's something like an airsoft gas blowback or rubber guns, sure, I'll ship those to someone. And it says somewhere on the contract, I assume that you have taken care of all the permits and whatever else, and you have somebody there who knows what they're doing. But I don't always have a way to check that. That's kind of their responsibility. But the more levels of function a prop has, the more things that can go wrong. So whether that's an airsoft gas blowback that, they dropped the magazine one too many times, or just it's jamming and they're not sure why. Like I rented one. So for people who don't know, airsofts are fairly cheap and fairly realistic. They can be either spring guns, where it's like you pull a little spring and then it goes pop. They're made to shoot these little 6mm plastic BBs. They're basically like lightweight, kind of halfway between BB guns and paintball. But the ones that we use most for props are gas blowback. So there's some compressed gas that cycles the action. So it looks like the slide of the pistol moves or the bolt of the rifle moves or something like that. So you get something for the actors to respond to. So that's great because even on a budget and with safe, close proximity and whatnot, you can still get something for the actor to respond to. Solid rubber inert props is just so hard for an actor to take it seriously and not feel the need to be like, bang, bang, right? Like you don't have to say bang. We'll foley that in later. But, you want it to do something and to sync up the action between the two different people. So even just a little ka-chunk, something like that, the actor knows when it happened. It feels a little bit more real. And there's a little less to CG afterwards. But, the more things that can function, the more things that can break or jam. And so it's good to have somebody on set who knows, at least to some degree, well, what can we fix? And what do we need to have a backup for if we can't fix it? Or, what's plan C? When you have, especially something like blank guns, there always needs to be what do you do if it screws up? Because at some point it will. These things happen. And you don't want an actor just kind of improvising and scared while the cameras are running and not sure what to do, both for safety reasons and for budget reasons. The film I got my SAG card on was low budget by Hollywood productions, big budget by indie film productions. Then we're doing a battle scene. We had probably about 150, 200 people, some horses, a bunch of reenactors with matchlock muskets, which was a swashbuckler thing. And one of the extras, not a stunt person, an extra, was handed a lovely reproduction matchlock and went to the front and went to fire, and it didn't fire, it misfired. But, historically these things did a lot, but nobody had told him what to do. So he immediately breaks character, waves off screen, and is like, what do I do? And ruined the shot. And they carefully smoked up the whole field and had all these people running around. So we had to stop everything. If they'd just taken the time to say, if it misfires, just pretend it went off and keep going, or lay it in a safe direction and lie down like you got shot, and then we'll talk about it once you hear cut or whatever, right? You got to have a plan B in place too. So there's a lot of logistics that goes into it other than just how do we keep it safe. It's How do you look like you know what you're doing? Do you have a trainer who can actually train your performers to look legitimate? Can you help them? You know, if you have someone who just can't fake recoil and they really want that, is there a way that you can find these little tricks to help it sell? Um, are there things that they will notice because they know about these props that other people won't? So like a lot of continuity people don't know about things like the hammer being back or not, or safety on or off, or other things like that that are a little more specific, like, hey, your sight's on backwards on that rifle, or you haven't even flipped up the caps on the scope, so you wouldn't be able to see anything. You know, one of my pet peeves is single action firearms like Colt 1911, threatening someone with that with it not cocked. It would not fire that way if you pull the trigger. So, but again, unless you've got somebody who's the right kind of geek on that set, they're not going to catch those things. So the armor can help with stuff besides just what distance is safe and what vent lane is safe for a blank. They can also help with how to make it look good, how does everybody feel safe, how do we keep things running smoothly even when there's issues. It's all that stuff too, and some of that doesn't cost much.
What's your recommendation for protocol as far as like the community? I mean, like the cost. Should the actors, the film production should have contacted the police and said, "Hey, we're filming"?
So the big things. One is advance notification. My ideal is to contact the 911 switchboard the day the 911 switchboard shortly before you start rolling, and the local police district the day before, so that when they do their briefing at the beginning of that next shift, they can make it a part of their shift briefing. So those things can both help. The 911 switchboard, because you know, like Bullets, Blood, and a Fistful of Cash. We shot that in Seattle around 2004, something like that. You know, we were shooting down on the docks. It was freezing. But you could have potentially, depending on who calls it in, you could have the Seattle Police, you could have the Harbor Patrol, you could have the State Highway Patrol, you could have Homeland Security, you could have the FBI. You know, there's all these overlapping jurisdictions, but they're generally dispatched by somebody calling 911. And so that's part of why you want to have that access point in the know. And then a lot of it also is just being visible. So making it obvious to everybody that you're working on a movie. You know, just having stuff off frame, posting signs, having a sandwich board out there. The more C-stands and lights and tripods and whatever you can have lying around out of frame, the more obvious it is to somebody walking up on it, oh, they're making a movie. But if you're shooting from the inside of somebody running out the door, you might think, oh, I don't need anybody out the door, because they just run out the door with the guns and the bag of cash. But you need some PAs out there so that if somebody walking by freaks out, you know, it's not even just police. You know, this is the United States. We have a lot of people who walk around armed, and some of them probably have a bit of a hero complex. So they may not always have the most deliberate thought process before pulling a sidearm. So you want it to be as obvious as possible that this is a movie and not real life.
So let's go back to, let's say again, in the low budget, indie filmmakers, or just picking up their phone, a couple of BB guns. What is the protocol if they're gonna have, let's say they're having a shootout, you know, maybe one guy's aiming the gun at the other guy and they both die and they shoot each other at the same time. What's the protocol and safety measures that go into something like that? Like, do they aim the gun at each other, or they do not, or they pretend they are?
I would actually start with backing it up, going to location scouting if we can, because anytime you can make this private property and an enclosed, controlled space, it's gonna be much better. Because then that's the overlap between the safety question of observers, like, you know, can we close the blinds, or if not, can we put something outside the window to make it obvious, so that if somebody's just looking in the window, it doesn't look like, oh, someone's getting shot to death. So, you know, some of that is also just the protocol that it helps actors feel safe to know that someone else is taking care of that. It's not their job, but they need to know that other people are doing their jobs before the actor can do what they need to do. Right, so they can just focus on their thing. And this to me is part of the conundrum of Rust. Of a lot of people were really quick to blame the actor, and yeah, he's complicit in his producer role as well. But to me, the actor always has the right to know what'll keep them safe, but it's not their responsibility to know. If someone says this is a non-firing prop, the actor should be able to trust them in the same way that if I rent a car, I should be able to trust that the brakes work. I have the right to like check them first, but I shouldn't have to before I drive off the lot. That's their job, right? So in terms of aiming, it's going to depend on the shot. You know, all of this comes down to what does the camera see? There's always got to be one thing that's fake, at least. So if it's a front venting blank gun that could conceivably shoot something out the front, that part is real. So something else has to be fake. Like the person you're shooting at is off screen, so there doesn't need to be anybody in that direction at all. You know, shoot them separately and just kind of cut back and forth between them, so you don't need to see them actually pointing them at each other. If they are seen in profile in a wide shot shooting at each other, the good news is depth perception isn't perfect. This is why the non-contact hits work on screen as well, is because you can't tell that little gap. You know, our depth perception isn't great on camera. So I can be aiming, these are not actually aiming at each other, but it's close enough on camera. So there's, if you're in profile like this, the general default is to cheat a foot or two off to the side so that you're not actually pointing at each other, but it looks close enough on camera.
So it's recommended do not point at each other.
As a default. Yeah. The more things that can be fake, the better. But again, if the director really wants an over-the-shoulder shot, now you can't aim offline or it becomes obvious to the audience. You know, if I'm aiming right at camera, I can't cheat offline without it being really obvious that I'm not. You know, if it's an over-the-shoulder shot or something, this is really obvious that I'm not aiming at my other hand now. Right? So now I have to aim closer to my hand. So now something else has to be fake. Maybe it's a completely non-firing prop, right? Maybe we actually film these two parts separately, right? It's lockdown camera. So we film the hand in one take, we film the gun in the other take, we put them together. They just don't have to actually be there. Like something's got to be fake. But it doesn't have to be the same thing in every shot. So there are times when, yes, we as performers have to break the basic safety rules that they teach you when you learn real firearms. So, you know, keep your finger off the trigger until you want to destroy something. You know, don't ever point it at somebody. You know, all of these things, at some point in a movie, you're going to have to break that rule. I was mostly just providing props and a little bit of armoring stuff, not doing stunts for Zombies of Mass Destruction, which filmed out in Port Townsend. I had other friends who were doing more of the stunt stuff, but there was one day that I just dropped stuff off and they came running back to the car and they're like, hey, can you come help us out? The person we've got in charge says we're not allowed to point this rubber gun at someone's head because that's one of the safety rules. It's like, yes, it is one of the safety rules, but we also all in this room know that that's a rubber gun. And so we can break that safety rule so long as everybody in the room knows and trusts that that is not a firing prop. So, you know, you got to have other rules in place to be able to break one rule at a time. Whether that's the director wants to see your finger on the trigger, even though obviously we don't want to actually destroy anything on our film set. Whether that's pointing it at a person, but first making sure everybody knows that it's not going to actually fire any kind of projectile at that person. Whether it's, you know, knowing that there's something behind the target or in front of the target, like all of these things that, yes, with real firearms, it gets drilled into you. If you break this rule, it's your fault if someone gets hurt. On movies, we kind of have to break those rules because we're showing executions and suicides and, you know, mass shootouts and all these other things that we don't want to actually hurt anybody, but we need to show that.
So let's take the swords. Now, we talked enough about guns.
Mhm.
I just wanted to satisfy the audience. I think a lot of people are going to be very curious about that. What about like going through panes of glass or getting a vase or a bottle smashed up? I know there's sugar glass, but what is your kind of experience in those type of arenas?
Yeah, I've done some. I've got some footage of me getting hit in the head with bottles, both in workshops and in what did they call it? Misfired. I forget what the subtitle was. Anyway, one of the things I worked on when I looked at Cleveland. I wasn't actually.
Where do you live now? What state are you in?
I'm in Eugene, Oregon now. I've moved around a lot.
Oh, you're closer.
Yeah, I'm back in the Pacific Northwest. Yeah, I'll be up in Seattle in late August for a workshop, and it's because it's just a few hours drive up the street. Yeah.
Perfect.
So yeah, it's the bottles are actually not sugar for the most part anymore. They use a recyclable plastic, which is nice because sugar, when it gets wet, gets sticky. And even if there's no liquid in the bottle when it's broken over your head, you're doing stunts, so you're going to get sweaty. And you're going to have these little bits of basically hard candy in your hair while you get hot and sweaty. And that just, it's annoying. So yeah, it's basically plastic. And you still got to think about, okay, what part are you hitting them with? And you can still get minor cuts from it. It's not completely idiot proof, which is why it's still a stunt. But it's certainly safer. Going through windows, there's a couple of different ways to do that. Usually that's not sugar glass, actually, just because big panes of that are too expensive. Um, the classic way to do going through a window is tempered glass, and they have a little popper, they call it. It's basically like a squib, a little pyro charge like you'd use for a blood hit effect, but propelling a little nail head essentially to smack a corner of the glass on cue.
Yeah.
And the whole thing about tempered glass is it's made to not make big jagged things that'll cut you, but when they smash, they kind of dissolve into these little square beads. Right. So most modern glass is designed that way so that if somebody does go through it, it'll be a bunch of little glass gravel bits, but no big jagged things that'll cut them and they'll bleed to death.
Oh, car window
Yeah.
windshields.
Yeah. Although car windshields also have a layer that like keeps them together so they don't just kind of dissolve into bits, whereas a lot of window panes don't. And so they will just kind of fall into little pieces and not have that kind of like, the car windshield will have this sort of like bendy quality. When it breaks, it still holds together with a spider web. Windows will usually just dissolve into a curtain of bits. So what they try and do is time that. The coordinator will set that off right before the stunt person hits it. So the idea is that what the stunt person is actually going through is basically like a curtain of little glass beads that are in the process of exploding and falling. Because just cracking it in that one little bit in the corner will make the whole thing lose all of its structural integrity. And then you're just going through debris, basically. So it's more about how do you not get it in your eyes or get scraped up when you land. But it's a lot safer than the giant like old panes of glass where you have sharp, jagged edges. That's where it gets really dangerous.
Are there any, like, when it comes to, like, you see some movies, you'll see they just broke glass, the actor's on the ground, and you see this glass kind of bouncing. Is that the same?
So they make broken glass out of silicone or rubber or whatever. So when you want to see flying, like glass flying from off screen, that's somebody with a bucket of silicone rubber broken glass thing. They're kind of just chucking it at the actor from off frame or something like that. Yeah.
So your roles as a teacher and author, how has that influenced your work in the film and theater industry? I mean, now that you're certified, now you have this training, does that improve and increase your chances of landing a role? Just even if they don't even have stunts, like, hey, this guy would be useful just in case.
It depends. Again, the film world, especially the stunt world, doesn't really have a whole ton of respect for books or certificates. I mean, there are certifications that are required for certain jobs, like a pyrotechnic certification or something like that. Scuba certification if you're doing water work. So that kind of thing, sure. But if you say, oh, well, I've certified in this weapon, they're not really going to care. The stunt world, they're going to want to see your demo reel. They're going to want to know references and who you've worked with. Probably in that order. So it's word of mouth, it's personal experience, it's what can you show me, much more than it is where's your certification. They don't really tend to care about that. When I moved to Cleveland, there was one group there that was led by a longtime union stunt former, and he had a group there that's fairly typical of how some of these work, where sort of a talent pool that he trains, so that when he gets booked on something, he knows that he has people who can double different types of actors, or I need someone who can pass for a 12-year-old kid. All right, what have I got in my group from that? And he also runs martial arts classes, so he also coaches from that. But every couple of months, the group of us would come in from sometimes hours away and do stair falls, vehicle drags, a lot of unarmed stuff, sometimes some weapon stuff, but just training for whatever he thought the next film coming up was. And so then the idea was you also kick in a little fee and you end up in their listing on the website. And so when directors come in, it's kind of like having an agent. Stunt people don't, it doesn't work the same way with agents and auditions that it does as an actor.
Yeah.
As an actor, I don't know that the certifications mean much, but if you can say, yes, I've done martial arts and weapons work and fight stuff, yeah, a lot of casting agents will just be like, great, check that box. And they're not going to know if you actually do know what you're doing or not, because it's not their thing. And that sometimes gets people in trouble. But then, there are some roles where that could be useful. The last acting job that I had was on Mayor of Kingstown, season 2. Shooting up in Pennsylvania was while I lived in Cleveland, just a couple hours up the road. And I wasn't doing stunts, but I was having guns pointed at me. And so I felt like I was maybe better suited than most actors to know how to deal with that. And approach that professionally. And that was also interesting just because I was not the gun wrangler. So there were people doing things that were not how I would have done them, but it was not my job to step on their toes and tell them how to do their job. But I did have a right as an actor to be able to say, hey, so if you're going to be pointing that at me, can I see what you got there? Oh yeah. But it was also a weird one because it was on a boat, and a fairly small boat. And the armorer could not be on the boat with us because it was a fairly small boat. So we had the performers and the DP were basically the only ones on that boat all day. And there were, support boats nearby that had the armorer and the director and the other boat that was coming in for the intercept and the helicopter and blah, blah, blah. But most of the day, there was 2 police characters and me and the actual ship's captain. I was pretending to be the ship's captain, but the person who actually knew how to drive the ship. And his crew, some of his crew who were, kind of filling in as extras. But yeah, and the actor was getting bored and like treating his AR-15 like a fidget toy. So, again, once I knew that we were in a closed set and I had seen that thing has no ammunition, it was a real AR-15, but it wasn't loaded. The Glock on his hip did have a dummy round in it, and there was no reason for them to have a real Glock with a dummy round in it. He didn't even draw it in the scene, but I think because he was on the boat, they wanted him to have it just in case the director decided they wanted something. But being able to see and hear and feel, okay, yeah, that's a dummy round. It's got the little BB in it rather than powder. Okay, I feel safe now. And then I'll just bite my tongue when I see him being bored, fidgeting and knowing that he's pointing it right at me. Again, once you feel safe, you can commit to taking chances. But if I had not been able to verify that ahead of time, or if I just had felt like I couldn't ask, I couldn't have focused on acting. I would have been focusing on like, can I not be in front of that, please?
How do you balance your freelance work with your responsibilities at Fight Designer LLC?
I mean, it is all freelance. It's a side hustle. So I had a good 12 years or so as a theater professor and was enjoying that. And one of the nice things about that was that all these side hustles actually supported my job. They liked that because it's my credentials basically. And I could talk about, here's what they're doing on set, or here's what happened in this other movie. So it was a great feedback loop of being able to teach what's happening in the field and have the authority to do that, and also try things out in the classroom and then take them back out and make sure that they actually work. So that was great. Now I'm back to having a day job. I had to move here this time for family reasons. I've got an office job that doesn't directly relate to any of this. So now it's back to basically being a side hustle. So, I come in, I do my 8 to 5, I come home, and then lately I've been working on pre-production for Play That Goes Wrong. So I've been working on building a shotgun that can fall apart on cue and a broken sword that'll match the other 2 swords so that we can do a swap and make it look like the sword broke. They had 2 and I had one that had the same kind of hilt. So yeah, pre-production stuff. And then, I'll have some rehearsals in a month or so, hoping to get some more classes going in a little bit, but it's, it's a little here, a little there. it's back to being a hobby for now.
Remind me at the end to ask you about something about a prop. I just want to ask you. So, what would you say is the most challenging aspect of coordinating a fight scene for theater versus screen production?
Oh yeah. So for theater, usually it's that most of the time the actors don't have much training. The vast majority of the theater that I've choreographed, and it's over 100 shows now, um, most of the actors have not done stage combat before. And so you are teaching as you go. And the first couple of rehearsals usually are essentially a class in whatever we're doing on that show. And so you try and cater that so that the things they are learning will directly be applicable. You teach combos and then you use those combos in the choreography so that you're saving time because there's just not a whole ton of time. But it's the actors, and they're hired to be actors not because of their fighting skills. So I've done the Scottish play 3 or 4 times. I did one at Lakewood Playhouse in Washington when I was there, where our Macduff was 60 something and had a bad back, and they wanted him in armor and doing sword and shield. And we did what we could. But then the next time after that I did it, I think, was Richmond Shakespeare in Virginia, now Quill Theater. Or is it back now? They changed their name a couple times. And that was a blast because I had a former rugby player athlete as Macduff, who did the final fight with his shirt off. We called him McBuff. At least I did. And our McBee had done Asian martial arts and was like really small and gymnastic ability. And we were in a small space with scaffolding. So it was just a really physical fight and totally different. But you have to work with what you get, and you never know going into it exactly what you're going to get. Film and television, budget makes a much bigger difference because it determines whether or not you have training time, determines whether or not you have stunt doubles, it determines whether or not you have the right options in terms of props. When I was working on Gamers Darkness Rising, for example, in Seattle, we it was a Kickstarter for that. It was, I think, $500,000, which for them was big because they did their first Gamers movie for $500 while in college. But it was whatever props and sets we could kind of throw together. So a lot of it was stage combat steel weapons, which in general you would not use on an actual film now. You'd be using aluminum or increasingly bamboo now because it's even lighter and faster. And so not having stunt doubles and having heavier weapons and things like that, that impacts what you can expect of people. And so I think a lot of the challenge with film and television is everyone expects, John Wick or Gladiator or whatever, they expect professional work because they've all seen it and the screen looks the same. So why can't the action look the same? But they don't always have the budget to do it right, and to do it safely and to do it well. And so I think often there's a negotiation, and sometimes it's talking myself out of work of like, maybe we don't need to see that happen. Can we imply that? Can it happen off screen? Can we, just cut to the floor and see like the blood splatter in the shell casing, or like, other ways that we can tell the story with the budget you've got, so that we don't have to have stunt doubles, don't have to have 5 different props, don't have to rent this other thing that we don't have, or I love indie film and the problem solving that goes with that. I still have the little hand pressure air squib rig that I made in Seattle when we were working on some movies there, because I remember testing it in my balcony and in my shower once. My wife came back and I was scrubbing fake blood off the shower ceiling. I'm like, oh, you're home early. Sorry. I wanted to see how well. Yeah, I pressurized it a little too much. It's just a hand pump thing. There's no dial, so I don't know how. It's like, I think 6 pumps will do it. But
where can we find the blueprints for that?
You creatively just find what you can. There's things on YouTube, there's tutorials.
Yeah.
I think I have a picture of it in one of my books. This I ended up using. But it's problem solving. And so when you don't have the budget, here's another example. Bullets, Blood, and a Fistful of Cash. Sam Aquino wanted this shot originally going down the alley where the hero takes his shotgun, bad guy comes up, jams the shotgun through the guy, picks him up, using him as a shield while firing through his body, shooting like 4 or 5 other people while we look kind of over the shoulder down the barrel, so you can't shoot offline. It's in close range because it's in an alley. So there were a couple of issues there. One is the how do you do the jam the gun through and then fire at things? That was a fun problem to solve. So I cut off a little plastic airsoft shotgun and made a fake section in the barrel that could strap on, and a little way to set off flash cotton in that, so that it could look like firing out of the barrel. That gag ended up not making it into the film, and I was so bummed until I saw one version, at least, where there were some outtakes at the end credits, and it's, I was sitting there setting off the flash cotton, hiding behind the big guy and pulling the string to set it off, so I couldn't see. But they got the angle wrong, so like the gun went in at one angle and the barrel stuck out at another angle, so it looked like it kind of comically bent in the body. So it's like, okay, that's why they didn't use that. And then the blanks one, again, it's just you can't fire blanks. 12 gauge blanks are huge. That's a lot of powder. I was working on Clutch in a brewery in Seattle. The police guys, we fired off a 12 gauge blank, and there was a plastic facing on a clock on the other side of the warehouse, 30 feet up, and it falls off just from the boom. Boom! And you hear this crash. What was that? It's like, oh, that thing way over there, just from the sound wave. So I had to demonstrate for Sam why we couldn't use blanks, and I grabbed some cardboard soda boxes from craft services. I was like, okay, fire in the hole, and he shot the hole through like 3 layers of cardboard with a blank. And he goes, okay, so what can we do? And so again, trying to find like, well, I could rig up the flash cotton thing, but I can only do one of those at a time. So we can't do a long take of following him down and doing like 3 or 4 shots. We could like eject casings and walk on to the next person and just not have that shot fired. So giving them options of, well, what can I do on the budget I've got? Because sometimes people, again, we're picturing something that is massive and epic, and we don't have the budget that is massive and epic. So how do we find a way to do that on the cheap? We don't have a gun that can eject shell casings. Well, is there a way that, if you can't CG it in, if that's not in your wheelhouse, can you have somebody just below frame going,
right,
like chucking them or something, right? Do we even need to see it, or do we just get the sound? Just adding sound in, the audience will maybe think that they heard it, or just show that side, show this side of the pistol instead of this side, so that they'd be going up, away from camera, and you wouldn't see it anyway, instead of here where it would be going at the camera. Plan these shots out. Airsoft, sometimes if you look at the barrel, you can see the inner barrel that's sized for the plastic BBs, so it gives it away a bit. Or if you see the magazine, you can kind of tell that it's a airsoft gas magazine and not a real magazine. So it's like, okay, we want to see a reload. Well, you can see like the last 3/4 of a reload. We can sell that. But if you see the end of it, you'll know that it's not real. So how do we set up the shot without having to have professional props, but using the $60 thing that you found on Craigslist? How do we make it work with that?
How is your training at? I'm gonna butcher this. I can't. It's my Asian tongue. Margolis method and Michael Chekhov, the techniques impacted your approach on acting and teaching. How has that impacted you?
It's nice. It's they're both very sustainable methods. They're very healthy methods, because I don't have to go to deep dark places to do stuff. I just have to figure out what the physical subtext is. And so instead of having to, especially in these intense scenes where it's, we're torturing people, or we're doing horrible things to people, or having horrible things done to us, and we just met them and we want to be nice to them. You got to be able to step in and out really quickly and not make them think, oh, this person really wants to hurt me and I don't trust them. You got to be able to be like, okay, so I'm gonna go in here for a moment, and we're just gonna step in, we're gonna step out. Okay. All right, so that's where it's gonna be. It's gonna be there, and then it's gonna stop. And all I'm doing is a down, right? I don't have to think like, oh, I hate you, and I just want to like twist that knife and rip your guts out. I just have to think down, right? Or compress, or reach out, whatever, right? Finding that it goes in, it comes up, and then it drifts down. And that's a lot easier to play than imagining the dagger coming in and twisting. And some actors like to have that imagery, but you don't have to. That's also part of it, is reading the room. Sometimes when you're like, okay, I need you to sell this uppercut more, sometimes they want to know, like, okay, it's not just like punching the muscle. It's like it goes in under the ribs, and we're like punching up So we're like punching the air out of your lungs and your lunch, and it's going up in there. I'm like, oh yeah, yeah. And other people are just that's gonna totally be like, yeah, I don't want to. Other people is just like, okay, I want you to imagine I'm tying a little string to your belly button. I'm gonna go whoop out the back. Yeah, there we go. Yeah, out there. Right. So finding
Yeah.
the source of imagery that makes sense to that actor. Sometimes if I can find out, just getting to know folks, like other sports you've done, other martial arts you've done, other hobbies that you've done, just so I can be like, okay, yeah, just think of this as like spiking the volleyball. Oh, okay, I know how to do that. Right. So it's just okay. But hit it further out now, less down. Okay. Right. Coaching in their language. So
Mhm.
even though I've maybe specialized in the Chekhov work and the Margolis work, it helps as anybody who coaches any part of acting, whether you're a director or a dialect coach or a DP or whatever, right? To be able to speak the language the actor understands. And so if that's going to be Meisner, if that's going to be, whatever it is, be able to speak their language enough to get what you need from them in a way that they understand and it feels safe to them.
And it sounds like it's more subtle,
Yeah,
the way the approach is versus kind of big,
it can be. I mean, we're moving as an industry, we're moving towards healthier practices, I think. Some of that's things
Mhm.
like having an intimacy coach around when you're working on scenes of vulnerability. Some of that is just being more consent based. So a lot of the auteur directors that we used to glamorize would pull things like surprising actors of, okay, I'm gonna do this for real and not tell them we're gonna do this, because it gets a real performance out of them. Yeah, okay, sometimes you got some good moments, Alan Rickman falling off the Nakatomi Tower because they told him they'd drop him on 3 and they dropped him on 1 or whatever, right? Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a little borderline, but not too bad. But there are other things where it's like, whoa, okay, we don't work that way anymore. Um, we want to try acting. So yeah, I think being able to give someone a very basic physical subtext of, can you think of it as more of just like a compress? Cool, but maybe compress a little lower now instead of up here, right? Oh, you're getting shoulder tension and jaw tension. Can you get it more down here? Yeah, okay, that's better for that moment. When it's basic physical imagery, it's easier for people to understand. Whereas when it's atmospheres or things of like, okay, imagine you're in like a graveyard. Like, I ran into this in my acting classes in college. They'd be like, okay, the atmosphere is like a graveyard at night. And I was a goth kid. I used to go for walks in the graveyard that was next door to the college at night. So I'd be like, I don't think this is going to do what you want it to do. Because it depends on associations. Or I'd be doing the Lecoq work, and we'd be like metaphorically climbing a mountain or walking through the jungle, and I'd be going into sense memory of like, well, which mountain are we doing today? Or they're like, no, it's too literal. We need to be poetic. I'm like, okay, so we have different
Yeah.
ideas about what that means. But the more we can get just specific, like this tension pattern, this rhythm, this shape, especially in film and television, where we don't necessarily have time to let the actor kind of find their way into it, but cameras are rolling and we're on set and we just need to find a way to coach something that'll both be theirs and work for what the director wants right now. That kind of imagery, I think, is helpful to me.
Hey, you said you directed. Was that theater or film?
Mostly theater. I mean, when you're theater faculty, you usually end up directing every year or two,
Okay.
or sometimes more. So I directed on campus a bunch of times, and in grad school, I directed some shows and things like that. I've done some short films, but I haven't done any serious directing. It's not really my main thing. I think largely just because I just don't have that time and energy. It's a lot. You got to be really motivated.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
And have all the right friends and connections, and that's a lot of work, man. I'm
It is.
usually happier to find somebody else who's done a lot of that and is like, want to come play? I'm like, sure, I'll come play. That sounds fun.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm your dime.
Yeah. Yeah. You paying?
So, what kind of advice would you give an aspiring actor or a stunt performers who want to specialize in fight choreography and stage combat, or
Yeah.
get their feet wet into that
Yeah.
area?
I mean, it's hard to know what the next fad's going to be. The industry does love to latch onto things. For a while, everything was, kung fu wire work, and then everything was MMA, and then it was parkour, and then it was, John Wick, Aikido, and Jiu-Jitsu, and center axis relock. All the things kind of shift, and sometimes they stick around and like, oh, we just assume you know that, but do you also know this new thing? And sometimes they just go away. And so it's hard to predict what will be useful. So my main advice to students especially is always just find what you enjoy, and that makes sense for your body and your brain and how you think. So if you are someone who just wants to play and you're really athletic and you like music and you love the cooperative aspect of this, go play with capoeira, right? Go join a group. You'll learn some really cool moves you can do, and you'll get a lot of good practice gauging partner distance and timing. But if you're like, I'm too old and out of shape to do capoeira, and I really like close in work, and like, to me it's the feeling the body sensitivity. Cool, do some BJJ, learn some falls and rolls, do Wing Chun, learn how to control things on the center line. Like, find what works for you, because on set it's always easier to work with someone who has something that they know well and like than to start from scratch, right? Robert Downey Jr. doing Sherlock Holmes is one of my classic examples. Canonically, Sherlock Holmes does Bartitsu, which is a Victorian era mixed martial art that combined the first judo to come to the Western world with the Swedish vignette style of cane fighting, with British pugilism and a couple other things. This is a whole another tangent if you want. But what Robert Downey Jr. did was Wing Chun, because that was how he helped work through his addiction and other issues, and he was really into it. He was good at it. And so when they were working on the fights for those movies, it made a lot more sense for him to just use what he knew how to do well than to try and say, okay, throw that all out. That's not what Sherlock Holmes does. You need to learn this other style. Let him own it, right? Well, this is what his Sherlock Holmes does, and it is now, and that's fine. And the fights for that were awesome. Richard Ryan did some great work with those. I got to play with him a little bit at some workshops when I was working on those. And it still makes sense. Sherlock Holmes hung out in opium dens. He could totally run into one of the advanced students and learn a little Wing Chun somewhere along the line. Why not? So have something that we can tap into. Right. And if it teaches you falls and rolls, that's great, because at some point you're going to hit the ground, and it's good to know how to do that without hurting yourself. But something you can use your body, you can show intention so that you know what it's like to hit something, not just as a or a purely deadpan physical, but like to actually put some intent and some body weight into it with whatever style that is. I don't care how you're hitting, but just so that I know that I believe it, because you've done the reps, you've practiced that, whatever it is. I can use that. I can adjust the character to fit what you do well, but have something that you do well.
It's good advice. So I know you said you wrote the Screen Combat Handbook and the Theatrical Firearms Handbook because nothing existed at the time. How was that? Are they still relevant today?
Yeah, I mean,
and where can people find them?
Obviously, the Theatrical Firearms Handbook came out long before Rust. That one came out in 2014. So my examples from that were John Eric Hexum and Brandon Lee. And I think I said something like, it tends to happen every, 15, 20 years. And so we're due for another one, but please don't any of my readers feel the need to go out and be that bad example. If we ever do a second edition, we'll have another example. Some things have changed since then in terms of it's gotten a lot easier to get front venting blank guns. It used to be only top vent you could get here, which didn't work as well for film. There's been some great progress with airsoft gas blowbacks and other options for shell ejection, and just lately I've been playing with fake suppressors that can do LED muzzle flash, and in some cases even a little mini vape style smoke machine inside it. So you get some really cool on-camera practical effects.
Where do you find those?
If you go to tinyurl.com/pewtube, I've been sharing some of that stuff there. PewTube is one of my YouTube channels. They're not available in the US yet. And so it's all these kind of sketchy import sites. I got mine from a drop shipping site that so far one of the 3 things I ordered has worked. One's been reimbursed and the other I'm still trying to get reimbursed for. So
that was my idea. I was like, I was gonna ask you, can you invent this?
It's a new thing that's in progress, but I think they'll
Yeah.
become more available. The ones with the LED flash, those you can get now at airsoft stores in the US. It's just the smoke machine part that's like the brand new thing, and the light
Interesting.
needs something to hit, but you can just have like a smoke machine in the space. If you've got haze or just a wall or something nearby for the light to hit, it'll still help.
Yeah.
But so yeah, there's some things that have changed, but I think the basic principles are still the same. And the Screen Combat Handbook only came out in, what was it, 2020, I think. So
Okay.
that's all totally relevant. They're both published through Routledge, so you can get them through the Routledge publisher website. They often have 20% off coupons that come out a couple times a year, so sometimes that becomes the cheapest way when they're on sale. But you can
Yeah.
also get them from Amazon or any other bookseller.
Have you ever thought of doing a video book? Like you take that chapter,
I don't
go on
know.
YouTube, break it down, do some demos, really
I've
explain
thought
it.
about it. It's a lot of work and a little bit more
Sure.
budget because you have to have a venue and a crew.
Yeah.
And it's much less payoff in terms of, like, when I was trying to get faculty jobs, there's a prestige to publishing a book. Whereas if you say, well, I put some videos on YouTube, nobody really cares. So I do
Yeah.
have YouTube channels where I share stuff, but because I have very little time and money, it's just, it used to be in Cleveland, it was me in my basement with a green screen. Now it's mostly me in my garage, just kind of saying, hey, here's the cool thing that I'm working on right now. Want to see?
Yeah. Yeah.
It's not much fancier than that because that's what I have time and energy and money for. So yeah, there's a fight designer channel on YouTube and the QTube theatrical firearms channel on YouTube. And I'll share stuff. I've got Facebook pages for both books too, so I share things like my content and other people's content sometimes when it comes up for that. But yeah, I don't know. Maybe
That's
someday.
awesome.
We'll see.
You have to, I have your links, but I don't see a YouTube link in there. Is it just off your website, fightdesigner.com? Do you have your,
I don't remember if I have direct links there or not, but I'll send them to
well,
you.
send me your
Drop 'em.
links.
Yeah.
We'll put them in. I got two more questions. One of them is, what is your best production film technology that you like? And then the second one is, I'll let you answer this one first. Your favorite film production tech, whatever.
Film production
be-
tech. Ooh, tough choice. There's some cool things out there right now. I mean, I think stabilizers have done great stuff for action and chases, and the fact that it's cheap and accessible now. So GoPros. Yeah, I think honestly, just smartphones, because previs has become a staple of action now. It's a great way that you can workshop ideas and show it to the director and the DP. Say, is this the right idea? Is this what you want? More of this, more of that. And there's some great examples on YouTube of kind of side by side. You can see the previs and then what they ended up shooting. Things like Winter Soldier's got a good one. And then there's others where it's like the David Leitch films where it's it's a stunt guy making the movie. So in those, they're almost exactly the same, the side by side of like Atomic Blonde or whatever. But yeah, previs is a great tool, and so it means
Is there a previs software?
so no, previs is just pre-visualization, and so for me, that's I'm just grabbing my phone and we're practicing the choreography, and I want to see not just does the choreography flow, but what angle is best to sell it from, and where does the edit work best. So it's a rough edit, but the fact that just on a not even like current phone, I can shoot something half decently. I can edit it together. I can maybe speed it up a little bit if I want a certain part to sped up or slow it down. I can drop in a rough cut soundtrack and some sound effects, even some really like super rough, special effects if we need to get the idea that okay, yeah, there's blood splatter at this part, or okay, that's the gun's going off here. I can just drop in some things. The fact that you can test your ideas and get instant feedback that way and share them with each other, that has made a big change, I think, to especially aspiring stunt people, because it means you can practice. You can just get some buddies together and practice. You don't need to shoot it on film and then wait a couple of weeks for the film to get developed and budget for a couple more feet more film next week. And it's instant feedback. You can check the monitors. You can know if that's hit sold or not. Yeah, just the way that video has become ubiquitous and instant feedback, and what you see is what you get. That's made a big difference.
When did you learn to edit?
Mostly self-taught. And it was just, a lot of it was for things like previs of, I just,
Yeah.
when I was starting to figure out, okay, what'll make things work on a fight scene on screen, you kind of can't tell until you start putting it together. And, the more that you can shoot things in digestible pieces, the easier it is for your actors. I mean, long takes are really popular now, but fake long takes are much, much easier. Because
Yeah.
then you don't have to worry about like getting through the entire thing without a single screw up. So figuring out when that whip pan or when that like wipe if someone walks in front of the camera or whatever, building those in. And so to be able to do something like that, you got to be able to edit. I did a episode of a web series, had a contest when I was in Seattle, The Hunted, sort of a Vampires meets Highlander. And it was one of the first internet web
nice.
series. Is like it goes way, way back, and it's still around. But Rob had a competition at one point, a contest, and I got a crew together in Seattle, and I wrote and shot and edited and armed and everything else. And I was still bummed that we got like fourth place and not third. One of the people, yeah. I have
That was
frustrations of why some of those other things shouldn't have qualified. But anyway, but that was one of my first times actually like producing, directing, editing, and that was like mini DV camcorder footage and early digital
nice.
editing.
Yeah.
But because I was planning camera edits, it was a found footage premise. It's kind of like Cops,
okay.
the way it was shot, right? So like someone just happened to be there with a camcorder. So I had to plan out, okay, where are we going to cut? How are we going to edit it together to look like a whole sequence? So I had to learn to edit for things like that. And then
you said it's still out there?
demo
Can we
reels and
see
things like that. Yeah, you can still see it. It's for what it is and all its badly aged glory.
I think it's good because I think people can see how everyone started.
Yeah.
It's not perfect, but here we are now. You know what I mean?
So that was The Hunted was the series, and Fuzz Meets Fangs was my episode. It was
Awesome.
A SWAT team raiding what they thought was going to be like a drug lab, but it turned out to be vampires. But some of the cops knew, and some of them didn't.
Interesting. Second question: how do you feel about AI?
Oof, yeah.
When it comes to film,
yeah, it's kind of like splitting the atom. Like there's so much potential for good and bad there.
that's a good analogy.
Yeah, I mean it's a powerful tool, but tools can be used in all sorts of different ways. So there's a lot of potential scary things there in terms of just putting people out of work. The fact that it makes it super easy to do a mediocre job means that less people are going to get paid to do good jobs. It's going to mean like our real actors and real stunt people are going to be like some kind of boutique, best book, only the fine whatever. Yeah, I don't know. In which case, it's still going to be a smaller group. There's not going to be that kind of average day-to-day thing. The fact that they can just clone your likeness, before the last round of SAG-AFTRA contracts went through, and part of what drove the strike, that they were just cloning people's likeness and voice, and they're like, okay, yeah, we can just use this for whatever we want now, and we'll just, and that they do that even just like scouring Instagram, find someone who looks right. We're going to manipulate them, deep fake them, and have them sell our product. And someone's like, wait, that's me. This is not what I agreed to.
Right.
It's happening with video games right now. The argument that the video game companies are making is that the motion capture, performance captured information, that performance is just data. Because it's data, it's not artistic product. Which to me is complete BS, because at this point, any performance is just data because we're recording it digitally. Yes, it's ones and zeros, but that doesn't make it not an artistic performance. So I really hope that the video game folks can work through that in a favorable way as well, so that they preserve their rights. Because otherwise, you're going to see, I've already seen this watching ads where I'm like, okay, I recognize that celebrity's voice, but I never see them, and I'm 99% sure they didn't actually say those lines for that ad. They may or may not have gotten paid a little something, but since it never said, I'm this actor, and I think probably the company doing it was able to just say, oh, we just found a voice. And yeah, it's a little sketchy. So there's some scary stuff there, but there's also some really cool stuff of, markerless mocap, because now you can just in theory, set up a couple of cell phone cameras, and it can find what it figures out is your body and replace you with, another actor that you can double without looking much like them, or a cyborg or a zombie or whatever. Um, Effects like that can be much faster. I'm hoping soon that things like, erasing wires and adding muzzle flash and shell casings, there's no reason that with AI running it, that couldn't be a super easy, like, app level add here, 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 and here, and it'll calculate, okay, where's the light bounce off? Where does the shell casing go? Where do we drop in that other background plate? It should make a lot of that work much easier, which also puts people out of business. But, having known people whose day job was erasing the wires from things like Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon, that wasn't the kind of work that they got excited about.
Okay.
So I think if some of those jobs go away, that's okay. Maybe we can find other jobs we're more excited about.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's an interesting double-edged weapon there. And I keep hoping that as we find more tools that increase our productivity and make it so we don't have to do certain jobs, at some point that should mean that we don't have to spend as much time working, and we can, like, enjoy our lives rather than, now you just starve to death, because without work, there's no productivity and no shareholder value increased, and therefore you have no value in society. So, I keep hoping it will translate to more leisure time and more artistic creativity rather than less. But it can go either way.
Thank you, Kevin. Thank you for coming on to the Valley Cut. Thank you for sharing your knowledge, your wisdom, your expertise. I appreciate you. I've always looked up to you and the things that you've done, because I love action movies. And so knowing that this is the man who knows how to make action movies, that's always been a key thing for me. So thank you.
Well, thanks for doing this. This is great.
Where can people find you?
At kevininouye.com or fightdesigner.com, either of those. I'm also fortunate enough to have a relatively unusual name combination. There's only a couple others out there that I know of, so if you know my name, you ought to be able to find me online somewhere.